Hey folks, Crimson Blaze here. Welcome to the channel. In today's video, I would like to give an overview of my John Muir Trail Thru-Hike. Specifically, I'm going to talk about those things that worked out really well during my hike, as well as some of those things that didn't quite go as planned. Let's get to it. The first thing I would like to talk about are the things that went well during my thru-hike. And the first thing that comes to my mind is the ability to hammock camp the JMT. So that was my major concern going into this trip was would I be able to find a hammock site throughout the entire length of the John Muir Trail? And the quick and easy answer to that is yes. It is very easy and very doable to hammock camp the John Muir Trail. What I found was that there were plenty of trees to hammock camp the entire length of the trail. Even at the higher elevation, in this most southern part of the trail, every time that you came down a pass, you would still come down into like a valley or a meadow or, a set of trees. Like you would have Wallace Creek or Badette Meadow or the Woods Creek area. You always came down into a place where you could find trees for hammock camping. I wasn't necessarily looking for established campsites. Even though if I found one, I would take it. But I just really needed water and a set of trees. And that really was easy throughout the entire trip. There's not once where I was hiking on the trail and I didn't think I was going to find a hammock spot. In fact, there's probably a couple times where I was even being picky with the set of trees that I had that I continued on hammock camping because there was plenty of trees and the water sources on the JMT are very plentiful. So I really had no issues at all hammock camping the John Muir Trail. The next thing I wouldn't change about my trip is the time of year that I went. So my first day on trail was August 12th and I finished on August 27th. The weather was fantastic. I don't know if this was typical for this time of year, but I had bluebird skies every single day except the one where it snowed, which was a bit surreal. But even after that snow day, it was blue skies and the weather was just fantastic. I probably had highs around 75, 78, and the lows were, for the most part, in the lower 40s. There were a couple nights where it got down to freezing when that front came through. But other than that, man, the weather was absolutely fantastic. And another bonus of hiking during the middle of August was there were no mosquitoes. I kept hearing about how bad the mosquitoes can be on the trail, and I didn't experience that. And I camped every night on the trail by a water source, either by a lake or a stream. I was always camping by water. That was one of my strategies is to camp near water, and I did not experience one single mosquito. And I think the third bonus of hiking in August are the water levels. So when you're watching a lot of these, these JMT YouTube videos, you hear about how the water can be really high and strong and fast for some of these crossings, or at least that your feet are getting wet. And so that's what I was expecting. Well, that didn't happen at all. There was only one water crossing that I had where I got my feet wet, and that was at Evolution Creek. And there's even a sign there that talks about, if it's high and swift and strong, there's an alternate place for you to cross. Well, I crossed, with no problem and at my ankles. Other than that, I crossed with dry feet over every single water crossing on the John Muir Trail. And I believe that's because the snowmelt has already, kind of come and gone, and the creek levels are now receding a bit. So I thought that was fantastic that I didn't have to deal with any dangerous water crossings. I didn't have to worry about getting my feet wet, and it was fantastic. So I would highly recommend, if you're going to do the John Muir Trail through hike, I would recommend hiking it in the middle of August. Another thing I wouldn't change about my JMT through hike is the direction that I had to go, which was northbound. Now I know the traditional route is to go southbound. You start in Yosemite Valley, and your summit, at the very end is Mount Whitney. The kind of climax of your trip. But for me, I loved going northbound. If I did it all over again, I would go northbound again. And there's a few reasons why. One, the permits are way easier to get. I did have to hike over, New Army Pass via Cottonwood Lakes, which added about 20 miles. But man, it's so beautiful out there. I didn't see that as, a punishment. So the permits are easier to get to go now northbound. And I liked having the tougher sections in the beginning. Now, this may be because I am from Colorado. I live at higher elevation. I am used to high kind of alpine hiking. I do 14ers. I do, one or two a year. So I'm used to that type of hiking. And I know how hard 14ers can be. So I thought it was a benefit that I was going to hit Mount Whitney and Forester Pass and Glen Pass and some of these tougher passes in the beginning when I had fresh legs. I can't imagine, you're at the very end of your trip and then you're having to tackle some of the toughest sections on the trail. And I hear people say, well, you get your trail legs by then. Well, for me, I kind of backpack and hike throughout the entire year, and so that wasn't really an issue. And again, I live at a higher elevation, so I didn't have to really acclimate for that long, and I think that helped me. But I loved getting the tougher sections out at the beginning of my hike. Plus, I felt like the trail got prettier as you were going northbound. Because in the beginning, it's all these high, jagged rock peaks, and there were some alpine lakes, but there's just really kind of a barren feel to it. And the feel got much softer and softer as you are hiking, further north, and you're coming down in elevation and you're reaching Yosemite Valley. So I felt like it was a bonus in that the trail was really becoming easier. The trail was beginning to become prettier in my eyes with some of the waterfalls and the meadows. And, it was just became like when I started hiking around Muir Pass, man, I just felt like I was in a kind of a different world than in that far southern section of the trail. And it was getting easier too as I was making my way to Yosemite. So that was a bonus. Another thing that I liked, and I'm not sure if this is true, but my feeling was that if you look at the trail itself, the entire length of the trail, it kind of goes southeast to northwest. So every morning when I was hiking, the sun was always behind my right shoulder. And the lighting on these passes and these lakes and the mountains in the morning was just fantastic. And coming down into these lakes and just seeing the light reflect off the water, I just felt like I had excellent lighting because I was hiking northbound. And so my assumption is that if the sun is behind my right shoulder, then for somebody hiking southbound, the sun might be slightly in front of their left shoulder and the sun would be in their eyes. And I know that's not true for the entire length of the trail. There's parts where you're hiking west or east and it varies, but the general direction of the John Muir Trail is southeast to northwest. So I thought that the lighting was great as I was coming over these passes early in the morning. And the final bonus that I think is a benefit for hiking northbound is my ending. And I know people will talk about the climax of reaching Mount Whitney, which is, it's fabulous, it is fabulous. But once you reach the top of Mount Whitney, you got to come down. Either come down and you go through Whitney Portal, or you come down and maybe you come back through Cottonwood Lakes. I'm not sure, but there's additional miles that you have to hike, hard miles, that you still have to hike. I loved coming into Yosemite Valley. One, I get to hike Clouds Rest, and you're up there on Clouds Rest, and I was up there for sunrise, and the sun is shining down on Half Dome and the Yosemite Valley, and it was just spectacular, right? And then I'm going down. It is steep down, but I'm going down, so my lungs are fine, my heart is fine, my toes may be a little bit sore, and my knees may have been a little bit aching at the end. But I'm going down. I'm not working that hard on my last day. And then when you're coming down, you see Nevada Falls just coming over that rock, and it is spectacular. I absolutely loved it. And then when I get to my trailhead, there's Curry Village, right? So I had the ability to take a shower. I had the ability to get an instant meal so I could clean up, get refreshed, get food in my stomach as soon as I finished. So I loved the ending of my hike and coming into Yosemite Valley. So if I were to do this trail again, I would definitely hike northbound. Another strategy I would repeat on my thru hike would be my food strategy. So what I did is I carried a food bag and a small bear canister. So here is my bear canister. It's the Bear Vault 450. I think it's the smallest one they got. And I can hold about 4 days of food in this canister. Well, I needed about 8.5 days in order to get to BVR. But what I had learned in my research was that there are bear boxes along the way. So I had a bear box at Crabtree Meadows, at Wallace Creek, at Vedette Meadow. I know that there's a bear box at Ray Lakes, and there's a bear box at the Woods Creek Suspension Bridge. And so that gave me the ability to put food into my food bag and store it in those bear boxes. And I think there was an advantage there, because when my food bag is empty, it's a Dyneema bag. It's super lightweight, and I'm not carrying a lot of additional weight. Whereas those bear vaults, they're heavy. They're heavy even when they're empty. So even as you are lowering the amount of food in your bear vault, that bear vault is still big, it's bulky, and it's heavy, whether it has food in it or not. And I think it's harder to pack in your backpack, the bigger bear vaults. Mine, I didn't have any issues at all, packing my bear vault into my backpack. And so I really enjoyed that strategy. The only thing is that it may have limited me in some of the places that I wanted to camp at. But really, when you're talking about Crabtree Meadows, Wallace Creek, Vedette Meadow, the Woods Creek Suspension Bridge, Ray Lakes, these are all beautiful spots. So I didn't think of it as, a disadvantage, and so I took advantage. I took advantage of the fact that there were bear boxes at these beautiful places, so that I didn't have to carry a big old bear vault. I could carry my small one along with my food bag. So I thought that worked out really well. And again, if I had to, thru hike the John Muir Trail again, then I would take advantage of those bear boxes. Another thing that worked really well for me on the trail is how I dealt with sun exposure. So the sun is pretty intense out there on the John Muir Trail. You're having sections of the trail where you're just exposed to the sun for 5-10 miles without a single tree or shade in sight. So you need to have some kind of strategy for how you're going to deal with the sun. And for me, I really used 3 different pieces of gear that helped me deal with the sun exposure. The first is my Gossamer Gear sunshade umbrella, and this was fantastic. I thought it worked really well as I'm going through those long stretches. But I love this one because it has a little clip, and it clips to the side of my shoulder pad here, and so I can be hands free as I'm walking with my sun umbrella, and that was just fantastic. But if it did get windy, then what I did then was I used my sun hoodie. And I wear these all the time anyway, and I love these. But it was really needed on this trail because if it was really windy, then I would just flip up my hood, and you seen, I put my paper clip to secure this because the wind is blowing hard and I don't want my hood blowing off. Because if I didn't have that paper clip, then I would have constantly been just putting my hood on and off, as the wind was blowing it off, and that would have been annoying. So having the sun hoodie with the paper clip, that worked out really well. And the third thing that I did to really help protect from the sun was I wore sun gloves on my hand. And that was a last minute purchase that I got at Mammoth Lakes. And I really am glad that I did. They worked out fantastic. And it really helped protect me from the sun. It also helped minimize the amount of sunscreen that I needed to use. I would still put sunscreen on my face, but it was just regular. I would call, I think it was 50 SPF. I would put on my nose and my face and my ears for coverage. And then I just really needed it for my lower part of my leg. So I wasn't using a lot of sunscreen. I didn't need to bring just, a big tub of it to deal with the sun because I had other means for that protection. And I will say another thing that I used was chapstick. And not just regular chapstick. I used SPF chapstick. And so I was constantly putting that on my lips. If I ever, drank, I would reapply. Whenever I ate a snack or lunch, I would reapply because I've had my lips burn at high elevation hikes, and it's miserable. So I was very conscious about keeping my lips covered with an SPF chapstick for that extra layer of protection. So I thought that worked out really well, how I dealt with the sun. Like I said, if you're planning your through hike for the JMT, you're going to need to come up with some strategy for dealing with the sun because it gets pretty intense out there. The final thing I want to talk about that went really well on this trip is my stay at VVR. I know it is a bit off trail, especially coming from the southbound direction, but oh man, VVR is such a wonderful place for backpackers, and I would do it all over again. And I would do it the exact same way that I did it, where I hiked into it that first day and then took a ferry out the next day. But I treated VVR as a town day. They had a hotel there, which I took advantage of, so I was able to have a private shower, private toilet. They have washing machines there so you can clean your clothes. They have showers, public showers where you can pay to wash your clothes as well. There's a restaurant and hiker box if you need to replenish anything. The camp store there has anything that you would need to help replenish your food supply or any type of medical gear that you may need. And I thought it was fantastic. It really helped me through my trip. I mean, I really got rejuvenated and refreshed because I treated VVR as a town day. I mean, I didn't leave VVR that next day until 4 o'clock when the ferry left, and then I only hiked about a few miles after that. And so I really felt refreshed coming out to VVR. I used it as my resupply, which is a much less expensive option than if you're going to go to MTR. And I just thought it was fantastic. So I would definitely recommend that if you're going to do the John Muir Trail, make a stop at VVR. All right, let's talk about some of those things that didn't work out as I had planned. The first are my shoes. I was not expecting the John Muir Trail to be that rocky, especially in the very beginning section of the trail. And I would say from Mount Whitney probably to the end of Mather, coming down on the north side of Mather Pass. There are sections of the trail where you are just walking on rocks for miles. And typically it was going up and down the passes. So I have the Topo mountain racers, and I have backpacked in those shoes all season long before the JMT, and I love them. They have been great. I used them on my Maroon Bells hike, which is a little bit rocky, and they worked out fantastic. But what I was noticing on these trails, and it was really coming down, to be honest. It was coming down the passes is where I felt it most. Where you're walking on, kind of softball sized rocks for a couple miles. And I think because my shoes were they're trail runners, and they have a thinner insole, my feet were just getting wrecked at the end of the day. I just remember coming into camp and I was hobbling, man. I was hobbling every evening. And I'd wake up the next morning and I felt fine and my feet were still a little sore, but obviously I was well enough to continue on. And I just remember coming into VVR and my feet were just wrecked. I mean, they felt like they were just crushed and bruised. And so if I had to do it all over again, I would change the type of shoes that I wore for this trail. Now, I'm not a big fan of boots. I've always heard that a pound of on your feet is like 5 pounds on your back. So I've never liked the idea of having heavy boots that I constantly had to, lift as you are hiking through the trail. But I would probably get something maybe more like the Ultra Olympus, where there's a thicker sole, and I might get a different insole into my shoe. Now, I don't think this would totally eliminate it, but I definitely would have wanted more cushion in my shoe than the Topo mountain racers were providing me. The next thing I would change about my John Muir Trail through hike, and this is an easy one, is that I wouldn't carry a sleeping pad or a ground sheet, because obviously it was easy. It was easy to find a hammock site each night along the JMT. So I didn't need to carry that extra weight. But I would say that, you may want to carry a sleeping pad and a ground sheet if you want to cowboy camp in a few areas where there aren't going to be any trees. And there were a couple spots, probably like the Evolution Basin and Sapphire Lake, just before you drop down to Evolution Lake. There are no trees. There's no good trees for hammock camping, but it is a beautiful area. So maybe you want to, camp there. Or alongside, even before that, there's Wanda Lake as you're coming down Muir Pass. Man, that was a beautifully stunning lake as well. And maybe you want to camp there. Or Palisades Lake. There's several places where the trees are not the greatest, but maybe you want that experience for a night or two on the trail and you're willing to carry that extra weight. If time were not an issue and I had more time to play with, I would hike it in probably 20 plus days. So I hiked the John Muir Trail in 16 days total, coming over Cottonwood Lakes and ending at Yosemite Valley. Took me 16 days to hike all those miles. And I had to do it in that time frame because of my work. I could only be gone a certain amount of days. So I squished it into those 16 days. But if I were able to extend out the length of days that I were to hike this trip, then I could hike shorter miles, meaning I could have stayed in Vedette Meadow one night and then I could have stayed in Ray Lakes the next night and it wouldn't have been an issue. And so having, more days, getting into camp earlier is something I think I would have enjoyed because I like bringing a tenkara rod for like fly fishing on some of my backpacking trips. And I probably would have carried that knowing that I'm going to be into camp early around these beautiful lakes and streams. And I would have loved to have brought my tenkara rod along with me for these trips. But as it was, especially in the beginning, I was coming in 6:30, and I was just wiped out, you know. And you do your chores, you eat your meal, you go to bed. I go to bed like at 7, 8 o'clock, and I'd wake up at 4 or 5 and do the whole thing over again. So I think having more days, I could have, not pushed it hard. I wouldn't have been as worn out in the beginning, and I could have had more time just to kind of enjoy the lakes or enjoy the area that I was in for that night if I'd have taken more days to do that. So you may be able to hike 15, 20-mile days. That's how I was thinking coming into it. Like, well, I can hike 20-mile days. I did that on the Colorado Trail. Yeah, sure. But I think it would be more enjoyable if you take longer days and just enjoy the area a little bit more. One thing I do regret that I didn't do on this trip was camp at Ray Lakes. This was, definitely top 3 for me in terms of lakes on the John Muir Trail. And I wish the miles would have worked out for me. Instead, on my trip, I camped at Vedette Meadow, which is absolutely beautiful and stunning as well. I am glad that I stayed there. But coming down, Glen Pass and into Ray Lakes, it is magnificent. And there's trees there at the middle Ray Lakes. There's a bear box at this location, and it'd be easy to hammock camp at this lake. Another place I wish I would have camped around was around Garnet Lake. So this was the day that it snowed, and snowed pretty hard in the morning. And when I was coming up, there's this little ridge as you're going northbound. There's this little ridge that you come over, and then you see Garnet Lake. And that wind was just ripping. It was just absolutely horrible. And there are some restrictions. I think it's like a quarter mile from the inlet or something like that. So there's some pretty tight restrictions. Well, on that day, I wish I'd have, camped just earlier and south of Garnet Lake, and then tackled that the next day, because I hear so much about Garnet Peak and this lake, and I felt like I kind of missed out on that. So again, if I'd had more days, I probably could have camped earlier, like maybe around Shadow Lake or just north of Shadow Lake, before I got to Garnet Lake. I probably should have just pitched my hammock there, and then experienced Garnet Lake the next day. Either there or at Thousand Island Lake. So again, Thousand Island Lake has these restrictions where you have to be a quarter mile from the inlet. And there is this one camp section that was off trail on Thousand Island Lake that I think might have worked. Looking back at some of the trees that are in that area, I at least would have liked to try. Because what I was going to do is I was going to hike past Thousand Island Lake and be above it where it's legal and there are trees. But what I noticed was that I really wouldn't have had a great view of the lake. And this is beautiful. Thousand Island Lake. I experienced that early in the morning the next day, and it was just fabulous with the sun rising on the mountains. Absolutely loved that area. So I would have tried to do something maybe a little different with camping at Garnet Lake, and or Thousand Island Lake. So again, if I'd have extended more days, then I could have I could have done both potentially. But I think, again, if you're taking more days and taking your time and big miles aren't necessarily a priority for you, then I'd recommend, camping around these lakes if possible. Finally, the last thing I would do different is the amount of food that I brought with me. Um, I still like the strategy of the bear canister and the food bag. And I think what I should have done, or if I would, something I would do differently, is I would carry a bigger food bag and more food in it because I was feeling it some morning. I mean, I was eating a granola bar for when I first got up, and then some type of Cliff Bar for second breakfast. I had my breakfast essentials drink, which gave me calories as well. For lunch, I had a power bar and some crackers. And then for dinner, I had like mac and cheese or my rambam. And I mean, I felt okay. I felt okay going through. I wasn't like I was sluggish, but I think I definitely would have benefited from having more calories. Because when I hit VVR and Reds and Tuolumne Meadows, that store, man, I did. I had chowed down and really put it away some calories while I was there. And I think I lost probably around 10 pounds when I got back from that trip. Just all the calories that I knew that I was going to burn. And, I'm a big guy. I could stand to lose a few pounds. But, um, you know, just thinking through back, things that I would do differently, I definitely would have carried more food with me on my trip, which meant I would need to carry a food bag, a bigger food bag with me, and then camp near that Woods Creek suspension bridge as my last night with a bear box going northbound. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Those are a few things that worked out really well on my thru hike and a few things that didn't work out quite as planned, but it was a spectacular experience. It was one of the best experiences of my life. It was probably the hardest thing that I've ever done physically in my life, but I loved it. I loved it. I would do it again. I would definitely make some changes, but I would do it again because the John Muir Trail is just spectacular from beginning to end as you are climbing these beautiful mountain passes and you see these alpine lakes and the waterfalls and the streams and the lush meadows. And I had deer coming up to my campsites down in these valleys, and it was just spectacular. But whether you go northbound, whether you go southbound, maybe you're going to do it in July or September, the John Muir Trail is worth it, and I highly recommend that you put it on your bucket list.